Assalamu alaikum and peace be with you. This is Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Welcome to Mujahid Talk on Muslim Network TV. You can always watch us on Galaxy 19 satellite. If you are still into the satellites, there are many people, 57 million of them in America on the satellite, and Amazon Fire TV or our own website, muslimnetwork.tv. We are on YouTube and Facebook and all over, and we'll be pretty soon on Apple TV as well. Today, we'll be talking about Afghanistan. When I was in college, well, not quite, just fresh out of college, that's when Afghan refugees started coming in, and they are still coming in. There are 2 million of them in Pakistan. I remember people were saying, who are these people? People will not rent houses to them, and we will have to interfere and invite people to allow refugees, honorable people, professors, students. That's how it became. Then masses started coming. 6 million of them became refugees. And now I'm an old man, and Afghan crises are still there. It used to be Soviet war. Defeating the communism was the thing. And America was using the term Mujahid and Mujahideen in a very positive way all over the television. President Reagan will meet with the delegation of Mujahideen, all those people who then, when America got involved in the war, started depicting them as monsters and whatnot. And now America is sitting with the same Afghans as did the Soviet Union, trying to have a compromise. But in the meantime, a whole lot of people have lost everything. Still, there are 2 million refugees in Pakistan and probably some in Iran as well. And this tragedy continued. How many died? Nobody knows. Nobody seems to care. We know, of course, very easily. If you Google, you will find Afghanistan casualties. You will find that 2,372 U.S. military deaths and 20,000 plus who are injured in Afghanistan. Those are American service persons. But you will have to really dig in to get any number about Afghan people. And that will be, if you get 100,000 plus, uh, underestimated. Nobody knows how many Afghans have died. And we will be talking about that. But now that Trump administration is very serious, it is into negotiation with Taliban, and they have signed the treaties, and they're satisfied with that treaty. But it is still saying that it will be, gradual reduction. By mid 2021, it will be a complete withdrawal. Going this slow, is it going to drag on and different people will be getting involved? Maybe Soviet Union will get involved. Their interest is to bleed America a little more because America bleed Soviet Union. So Russian might do something nasty in the name of Taliban, of course, and the whole peace effort will be broken down. So Afghan war will not be over until it's over. I was a fresh from college when this thing began. As you can see, I'm an old man. This thing is still going on. There are three generations of Afghan children who know nothing except war, whose father have died, whose grandparents have become refugees, things of this nature. They know nothing. The life expectancy last time I checked in Afghanistan was 44 years. That's it. And the same bread Afghan eat is eaten in Pakistan, in Iran, and in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, all the neighboring countries. They live 30 years or more than Afghans. What happened? Why the average life expectancy has gone down in Afghanistan? Because of war. It is not 19, 20 years of war. It is 40 years of warfare. To talk with me is somebody who really care for peace. And she has been all around. She has been to Afghanistan. She has been in the middle of the war in Iraq. And first time I met her, she has something called Voices in the Wilderness. And that's my mentor, Kathy Kelly. Please welcome Kathy Kelly. Kathy, welcome to Muslim Network Television. And she
Um,
has been with us on Radio Islam, but this is the first time on the Muslim Network TV. She has been our guest. Welcome.
well, thank you. It's a great privilege to be on Muslim Network TV with you and to see that this is a new journey. Assalamu alaikum to all of the viewers and to all of your colleagues, and certainly to you.
Thank you. Uh, Kathy Kelly has a master's in religious education from Chicago Theological Seminary. Well, I have marched with her, but I didn't know she's carrying some books of theology in her backpack. She founded Voices of Creative Nonviolence, an organization dedicated to standing against US involvement in Iraq and other vulnerable areas. Between Voices in the Wilderness and the Voices of Creative Nonviolence, she has traveled and worked extensively in the Middle East and across South Asia. She has worked with Afghan peace activists in Kabul for over a decade, leading to major real world changes on the ground, and we'll talk about it. And she's a recipient of the 2015 US Peace Prize. And she, in 2017, Veteran for Peace Gandhian Nonviolence Award was given, and she has been nominated for Nobel Peace Prize as well. So, Kathy Kelly, you have done so much for peace. Have you
Mhm.
achieved peace?
Oh my! It's almost as though people are trying to put out brush wars. You know, as soon as one gets stamped out, another one fires up. So there's never an end to the struggle to create a world wherein it's just easier to be good, easier to be peaceful, even though people long for that, they yearn for that all around the world. But simultaneously, there are people making tremendous profit from the wars. If they don't want war to end, or if the war is going to end, they want to start another one up really quickly because how else to sell the weapons? Sometimes how else to win an election. So it's a very, very, very troubling time for peacemaking.
But uh, but you keep going. What makes you keep going? I mean, you see not whole lot of success, but people can count war ending and things like that. But you keep going from organization to organization, from one march to the another march, for against armament, against this and against that. What gives you this inner strength and resilience to continue to stand up and your colleagues who march with you?
And I know it might sound simplistic, but I think we fall in love with people. You meet people in another country, and even though you're from the country that's clobbering them with all manner of missiles and explosives or economic strangleholds, people say, "Welcome, sit down, come in, hold our baby, sleep on our rooftop." It's very, very easy to be enamored with people who are simple people just like ourselves, and then to feel bonds and to believe that okay, I have the navy blue passport, but that does not give me a right to walk away from what we may learn. Once you have the knowledge about the suffering, the horrible suffering caused by wars, then you're responsible. And particularly being from such a wealthy country, from a secure space, I think my responsibilities are even greater. And so we do what we can. And maybe ours isn't to reap the harvest, but we better plant those seeds.
We want to talk today specifically about Afghanistan. And this Afghanistan war, as you know, has gone on for 40 years. First, it was the Soviet war, then it became their own civil war, and then it became American war and Soviet Union went down partially because of this war. And now we are under trillions of dollars of debt, and we continue to fight. And uh, but now they're talking about um, ending this war. Do you really see it going to end?
Anne Jones once coined the phrase, war isn't over when it's over. So sadly, there will be many, many more generations affected by this war. Will it, move toward a truce of sorts between the United States and the Taliban? I think both sides want that. The Taliban have a small team in Kabul right now to negotiate a prisoner swap, and that's a very essential step in developing this withdrawal of the United States troops, which is what the Taliban has clamored for. But there's nowhere near the level of discussion required for the Taliban and the Afghan government, a government which is in itself comprised of numerous warrior factions. That kind of discussion between the Taliban and the Afghan government isn't very close to nearing an agreement, and there are many, many fears that a new civil war could break out. It seems as though the truce, wouldn't deny hope to anyone. The 3-day truce celebrating the end of Ramadan and Eid al-Fitr is something, but when I look at the savage assaults that preceded that truce, I feel that we can't just brush over or gloss over what people in Afghanistan, right up until very recently, have been enduring. For me, there's a young woman we've grown close to over the years. She's part of the Afghan Peace Volunteers, and she has very bravely studied midwifery at the University of Kabul, and had come down with COVID-19, and it was a bad case. It affected her heart as well. And so she was eager to get back into the maternity wards and go to work again. And then the assault against the maternity ward on May 12th in Afghanistan was really exceptionally shocking. That was an assault in which suicide gunmen had broken into the hospital, and a long gun battle developed between the Afghan police forces and these gunmen. Women were running away from the hospital, unable to retrieve their babies. The newborns who had entered life were, not even named yet. And 18 mothers were killed in the course of that battle, and 2 babies and several nurses. And so Marzia, the young midwife, wrote and said, "Only God can understand me now." It's not the language of the crisp and the precise reports that tally up the dead. It's just her utter, deep down, grieved yearning, believing only God could understand her now.
Now, who do you think was responsible for that? I mean, when United States and Taliban are sitting and negotiating, whose interest did it serve, or did anyone claim responsibility? Because war is horrible. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says all wars are evil. That's his quote. But in war, people come up with the higher level of evilness, and this was one of such example. Did anybody, Kathy, claim responsibility for it, and anybody who was benefiting from it?
Well, that's a question that really must be answered with a sincere desire to explore the answer. The Taliban said that they were not responsible, that it was another warring group. But then from the Afghan Analysts Network, a group I highly, highly respect, a woman named Kate Clark said, well, that you can't really say that the Taliban doesn't bear responsibility because had they made more strides toward negotiating a truce, and now you know certainly the United States and the Afghan government are involved in this slow and halting process of coming up with a truce. But had there been more security, if the Afghan security forces, I suppose, hadn't been so focused on attacks that the Taliban were making, they could perhaps have been better prepared to prevent this group of militants storming the hospital. So I don't think the Taliban can say we weren't responsible, but neither can the Afghan government say that, and neither can the United States say it. And then I want to think in terms, of, I suppose, of green lighting, you know, what's permissible. I think you had interviewed me once, Malik, way back in 1998, the Desert Fox bombing of Baghdad had happened. It was a short bombing that President Clinton ordered, and I was there during that bombing, and right afterward went to a place that was immediately across the street from an old Ministry of Defense building that had been targeted. Well, when you target the old Ministry of Defense building and it's right across the street from a major maternity center, then you have on your hands the guilt of terrifying mothers in labor, in childbirth, while every window in the hospital was shattered, and some women lost their babies because they were so terrified. So does the United States greenlight bombing hospitals? Yes, it does. And then, you know, more recently and in Afghanistan, a United States drone, not an armed militant, but a drone operator in a fortified United States military base, fired on workers, migrant workers, who had just settled down to take their rest after working all day in a pine nut um, field, a forest of sorts, in the Nangarhar province of Afghanistan. And for the United States to hit them, they were innocent. There were children amongst those migrant laborers, and 40 people were maimed, badly wounded in a remote area with no health care, and 32 people were killed. So we can't say that, well, the United States is pristinely looking on at these savage assaults. The United States has made plenty of savage assaults against civilians, contributing to the deaths of women and children.
This is
And
Mujahid Talks. We are talking with Kathy Kelly, and we'll be right back after these messages. And you're watching Muslim Network TV. You can always watch us on satellite, Galaxy 19, Amazon Fire TV, and Roku, and always on muslimnetwork.tv. And we'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. You're watching Muslim Network TV, and with me, this is Imam Malik Mujahid, and with me is Kathy Kelly, who is a longtime peace activist and has a special interest in all places where America gets involved in bombing. She is there to witness and she talks to people, she works with people on the ground, and she comes back to America and informs peace activists what is going on the ground. And that's how I met her first time during the first Iraq war, if I remember correctly. Kathy, we were talking about peace and prospects of peace. And you mentioned war is not over until it is over, although peace talks are going on. And so, what is the number of casualties? I mean, when I try to Google it, I find directly, of course, that 2,000, more than 2,000 American troops have died and more than 20,000 are injured. But then I have to keep changing my keywords to find how many are Afghan casualties, civilian people dying. And I found a number of 100,000 plus. But this thing was going on for 40 years. About a few years ago, when I checked the life expectancy of Afghans, it was just 40, 44, or 45 years. That's it. And while the same bread is eaten by Afghans, the same bread is eaten by Pakistanis and Tajiks and Iranians just across the border, and they live 30 year, 40 year more than that. So, so what is the human cost of this war, which is going on for 40 years? First is Soviet Union, and now America.
You know, it was striking to me, focusing on that day when the maternity hospital was assaulted on May 12th of this year, that by the end of that day, just one day, 100 people had died across Afghanistan in battles. And this is while negotiations are going on, supposedly leading toward peace. So it's I think it becomes important to try to think about particular attacks or particular families or particular individuals, because the numbers are so very, very overwhelming. And those are, difficult stories to absorb. I'm still very deeply troubled by the story of Afghan migrants trying to cross into Iran. And the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission is investigating because Iranian National Guard soldiers, they were so, I suppose, frustrated and exhausted, and they didn't want new people crossing into their country, but they beat people and then pushed them into the river, and some survived and some didn't. I think at least 12 people are still missing. So, when I think of that, then I have to remind myself, well, the United States is jailing children at its borders. And so this idea of fortifying your country and keeping other people out, it increases likelihood of battles and suffering and retaliation and war. I think also, when you compare Afghanistan with neighboring countries, I remember once a delegation had gone over to Iran, and it included one of our young friends who had just gone to Afghanistan. And when she came back, I wasn't terribly familiar with Iran really, and I said, "Well, did you have electricity?" And she said, "Well, yeah, sure." And I said, "Oh, well, how did you find drivers who could navigate the roads?" And she said, "Well, they're highways just like ours." And then I started asking her about, whether or not they felt anxious eating food while they were over there, if there wasn't enough to go around. And she said, well, there is plenty of food. And so, one country over, while people in Afghanistan were desperate for water and were, flocking into refugee camps and watching in the agricultural areas as the livestock died from thirst. Well, people would never in the wintertime imagine having a steady flow of electricity, or, well, people couldn't really imagine a decent education, even if their kids were going to the universities at this point. The education system is so decayed in Afghanistan. One country over, you had relative prosperity. And I think the United States aims to change that, quite honestly. And now, under economic sanctions, Iran is suffering terribly. And especially during this time of COVID-19, in a really sinister way, which we saw in Iraq. The United States is interfering with banking transactions, shipping, things that are very necessary in order to move medical supplies in a modern time. And continues to impose these economic sanctions, ostensibly in relation to Iran preparing for nuclear war, while one other country over there's Israel with 20 to 40 thermonuclear weapons, and the United States never ever says that Israel must submit itself to International Atomic Energy Association investigations. And those investigations in Iran have consistently concluded, they're not moving toward developing a nuclear weapon. They're in full compliance with the demands of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, but that probably won't hold forever. Anyway, what I want to, I suppose, emphasize is that the ends of war are within our reach, but not as long as governments are entrusted with decision making, and those governments are led by people who are warlords and who are directly linked in with war profiteers. But the young people I meet in Afghanistan, and I'm sure young people we meet in Iran, in Pakistan, in Saudi Arabia, are quite often people who've got no desire to engage in killing their neighbors or destroying their countries.
The people which, Kathy, you work in Afghanistan with different volunteers you have, and they, what are their hopes for peace? I mean, they are in the midst of war. They're still trying to serve people. But are they hoping that when American troops are withdrawn, especially from Kabul, there will be peace? Will they be able to continue their work? Are they uncertain about it? Do they have any context? If America is negotiating with Taliban, are these peace workers negotiating with Taliban to make sure that they don't consider them to be hostile and attack them?
Well, those are very, very important questions. The Afghan Peace Volunteers have always tried hard to be an inter-ethnic group. They want their group to include people that are of Pashto background, Uzbek, Hazara, Tajik. That hasn't been easy. They've always been based in the Hazara neighborhood and predominantly include Hazaras. And sometimes, it's just been a long, slow process for the Hazara families to get to know the Pashto families, to invite one another over to their families, to go on trips together. But to their credit, the Afghan Peace Volunteers have every year hosted a gathering with a representative from every province in Afghanistan. And several of them have tried to learn each other's languages. They practice the national dance, which is a Pashto dance. I know this is going to sound strange, but in a way, it's amongst the street kids, the youngsters who really have nothing, whose often widowed mothers or single mothers say, I don't want my child to be a child laborer, but I don't want our family to starve. And so they send these kids out into the streets to become vendors or to clean cars. And for the girls, it's especially precarious because a little girl might be selling tissue paper and be so cute when she's a little girl, but when she becomes a teenager, there are gangs that might try to pull her into things that are much more dangerous than selling tissue paper. And the same for the young boys. I mean, the drug trade is certainly rampant within Afghanistan and within Kabul. But these kids who are in such a precarious situation, they actually are the ones who very often can make those connections between the different ethnic groups because they're out on the streets together and they share the same similar plight. I think often of the kids growing up in these refugee camps. They are squalid, terrible, violent places, and people are hungry and they're thirsty and they don't know how to get by. Um, but some of those youngsters are, to me, among some of the most empathetic and compassionate people I've ever met. I'm astonished when I get a chance to sit down and really hear from them. So that's one of the things the Afghan Peace Volunteers try hard to do. They try to get people listening to each other. They've even got this plan now for what they call relational learning circles. And they want to expand those so that one small circle would include people, a person from another country. And, here are these youngsters who, just discovered cell phones and they're trying to kind of move into high technology things. They asked me last night if I knew how to get an app. Sure don't, but they thought maybe that's what they would need to expand their relational learning circles. But meanwhile, in a very practical way, even though they had just lost the funding from another NGO that was going to cover their distribution of food to the 100 families that comprise the Street Kids School. Each of 100 street kids has a family. And there was a kind of a quid pro quo. You show up at school and progress within the school, and we'll make sure your family gets a donation of cooking oil, rice, and beans every week, which is estimable for families that are really and truly scrambling just to get water, and they never ever would imagine having meat. Well, they lost their funding, and so they were so resilient. They figured out a new scheme, and this was to ask every family to send one older member of the family, someone over 13, to the Gajaristan University to learn a trade. Maybe it's dismantling cell phones and recycling the innards. Maybe it would be cobbling. Maybe it would be some kind of car repair. But so that seemed like a good plan. And then with the COVID-19, that fell apart. And so what they did was just rearrange their budget, and they went out and got the rations for the 100 families that they knew would be so needy, and they did that for 2 months in a row. So I don't see my young friends really depending on their government very much for anything. And they certainly don't want to depend on the United States militarism. But when you mentioned uncertainty, oh my gosh, that's very much a part of their lives.
So, my question, Kathy, is that is it won't it be smart on their part to start talking to people who are connected with Taliban? Because if these people come in power, I mean, Taliban are the only group, before first time ever before they came in power, I was giving sermons that how in the world they say that they are Muslims and they are stopping girls from education. Because Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he will talk with one, one, one pronoun which will cover all men and women. But when it came to education, he especially mentioned that education is compulsory on each man and each woman. He will not, separate genders in his order, but when it comes to education, he did that. Uh, and here are these people who claim to be. So that was part of my sermon. But when America started bombing, then I stopped giving those type of sermons. But my concern is, although they have modified their manifesto and girls' education is part of it, but words don't change behavior. And my concern is that whatever was happening, so may get a stop. So what is the possibility of some of these wiser people who are on these streets, who are not getting funding from the American government and their grassroots connected with people, trying to help poor people, can have the similar type of dialogue with Taliban about the future? Because, if confidence is not built, America leaves. Uh, Afghan government is at the mercy of Taliban attacks, which will continue. In that way, there's going to be civil war, and people who have no better understanding of each other uh, are not in communication with each other may become victim from one side or the other.
Well, it's certainly not going to be easy, but one thing that I think can make a difference is that whether you're Taliban or, let's say, Hazara, when your grandmother is ill or when your wife is ill, you want health care. And I've watched the emergency surgical centers for victims of war, these Italian originated hospitals that have assiduously said, we don't exclude, we will stitch up anybody, but we give priority to people who are victims of war. And the safest way to travel through Afghanistan is to travel in a vehicle with the emergency hospital logo on it, because nobody wants to put them out of business, basically. You helped me understand that in Pakistan with ED, the remarkable, very grassroots ambulatory and medical services that were
Yeah, Eddie, you mean?
my pronunciation, ED. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
because Eddie, before he became this popular, he ran for office, and I used to march to get him elected, but
oh,
he didn't win and went into service and created the world's largest private ambulance sector.
yeah,
May God bless his soul,
yeah. So
Thanks.
along those lines, yeah, my young friends have learned permaculture. I mean, they really have learned it. They've had an Australian woman, Rosemary Morrow, come over and teach them several years in a row, and then they study it. In fact, they're now teaching some of the Kabul University Department of Agriculture people what they've learned about permaculture. And this was kind of left me kind of gobsmacked. I said, what? They said, yeah, we're teaching some of the people in the refugee camp. I mean, you can imagine these refugee camps, this gray, mud, dirty water. How could anybody be practicing permaculture? But that's what they're trying to do. And then the other thing they've really learned how to do well is install solar-powered batteries. Now, it's primitive compared to what is being done with solar power elsewhere in the world. But I can tell you it makes a big difference if you're in Kabul in the middle of a dark January and there's no electricity, when they can flip on that solar power and all of a sudden, you've got some electricity in the house. That makes a big difference. So they've been.
I mean, when I was there in Bangladesh in September 2017, and refugees from Burma was coming in. One of the thing I couldn't figure out what it was. It was just small square, maybe 6-inch by 6-inch solar panel. I mean, I found in the poorest of the poor people, they have nothing else with them except, some personal belonging in one hand and a solar panel hanging out of it. I mean, they had more solar panel than the solar panels in my neighborhood in Chicago. So I
Mhm.
know the poor people and refugees, they are very ingenious in the ways they come up to survive, because that connects with the powers their cell phone. And through that, they can communicate also, even if it's a little cell phone. Kathy, hold on a minute. We'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to conversation with Kathy Kelly, who is a major peace activist in North America, and we're talking about Afghanistan. You're not listening to, radio has turned into a Muslim television network, and we'll be right back after these messages. Stay with us.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. Past campaigns covered a wide range of humanitarian concerns. Through Bosnia Task Force, imams and leaders of Chicago's Muslim community worked to ensure Bosnia became a top national issue. This led to life-saving American policies in Bosnia. A key accomplishment was helping to get rape declared a war crime. Initiatives also included Kosovo Task Force, Central African Republic Task Force, and Flint Coalition, which brought awareness to the water crisis affecting the people of Flint, Michigan. Highlights of our work include supporting Black Lives Matter, Parliament of the World's Religions, addressing climate change.
So wasteful consumption starts the ruthless production, and that's where we need all the fossil fuel in the world.
And prominent media exposure.
This is Imam Malik Mujahid, President of Justice for All.
And I'm the Director of Outreach for Justice for All.
And that's why we need to go back to what worked.
Today we're demanding an apology from the CEO of Costco.
The Chinese crackdown on Uyghurs and other Turkic people has only gotten worse.
Current programs such as Burma Task Force advocate for the rights of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, internally displaced populations, and all those denied freedom of movement and at risk of starvation. Through this, we mobilized thousands of calls to elected representatives. This paved the way for the U.S. to increase funding for Rohingya refugees from $30 million to $210 million. Two of our documentaries were featured on international news outlets. The Rohingya People, a slow-burning genocide, on BBC World News, and Rohingya Refugees Tel Aviv Massacre was featured on CNN. We've organized rallies, UN mission visits, expanded presentations on campuses, promoted research and report writing, outreach to think tanks, media, and other influencers. Faith Coalition educates about the Rohingya genocide and crimes against humanity faced by ethnic groups in Burma. We've traveled to refugee camps, convened a meeting of Karen, Kachin, and Rohingya leaders, both to encourage cooperation and to guide them in congressional outreach. We organized Rohingya Advocacy Day. This led to over 100 participants visiting the offices of 60 U.S. senators and congressional representatives. Free Kashmir advocates for the people of Kashmir. Long-term goals include the call for self-determination, the end of the Indian military's occupation of the territory, and raising awareness of Kashmiri issues among the American people. After the August 5th reinvasion of Kashmir, we organized national protests in front of various Indian government buildings, partnered with Stand with Kashmir, and launched a petition condemning the Gates Foundation's decision to present Prime Minister Modi a humanitarian award. Save Uyghur informs Muslims and neighbors of other faiths about the ongoing cultural genocide of Uyghur Muslims and mobilizes public support. Our projects include boycotting Chinese products with our Fast from China campaign, pushing Bill S-178 in the Senate, and organizing a nationwide protest of Costco. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back to Muslim Network TV. You're watching Mujahid Talks, and I'm talking with Kathy Kelly, who is a major peace activist based in Chicago. But we're talking about Afghanistan. Kathy is there wherever America is there. America will be there with bombs. She will be there for a peace message and talking with people and being witness. Kathy, some people probably think that you are a CIA agent. Has anybody told you that?
Oh yes, I love the storekeepers in my uptown neighborhood, but sometimes I'd have just come back from Iraq and I'd say that, and they'd look at me with kind of a strange sense of unease, really, like, who is this person? But then over the years, they began to know us and trust us, but some then confessed and said, "We thought for sure you were
But this
CIA."
thing probably pops up. Why in the war a white woman is there with them?
Well, my own mother said to my sisters one time that she was pretty sure that Kathy must be working for the CIA because every time
Your
she
mom
comes,
said that?
yeah, she told my sisters every time Kathy comes back from those places, she goes right to Washington D.C. And I wanted to say, "That's right, Mom, and into cell block C when I'm arrested." I
Your
think
arresting, getting in prison is your cover up, I guess.
I'd say I've done my share of the cover up. Then I think it's 4 years in federal and quite a few local arrests. But in a way, we do have to become our own intelligence agency because we can't get the literacy that we need about the conditions, the terrible, unbearable conditions of war zones, if we depend on the mainstream media. I mean, with regard to Afghanistan, I have deep respect for Mujib Mashal and others of his colleagues reporting from Afghanistan. I mean, they have to tally up the deaths one day and do it all over again the next, and they try very hard to be precise. But how many people are reading the New York Times? If somebody's news source is their local paper, it's going to be difficult. And I don't want to make that a blanket statement. The USA Today had a superb, very detailed report about the ways that the United States and the mercenary groups that it now depends on in Afghanistan have contributed toward ongoing battles, exacerbated the war, and caused, in the case of the story they were writing about, 91 civilian deaths. So, but generally, the places like Afghanistan or Yemen or Gaza seem so remote and far away. And when people don't have a kind of a hook, a sense of like having a little bit of knowledge about a place, and they maybe feel like, I probably should, or I don't really know but much, so I can't comment. I couldn't find this place on a map. Then they distance even more, I believe. Just from watching friends.
So in this way, being witness, watching these things, meeting people, understanding, at least it, I wish you could be in mainstream media, but at least it keeps the peace movement people regenerated. I mean, the knowledge of what is happening to civilian in Afghanistan. And we didn't talk about Pakistan, but about 80,000 Pakistanis have also died in this warfare. And American soldiers, poor people who are getting into the army, 20,000 being injured, and whatever happening to veterans here is another. And the whole idea is, the cruelty at home sort of project cruelty abroad as well. I remember when Abu Ghraib happened, and I was giving a speech in a mosque in Winston-Salem in North Carolina. And when I mentioned Abu Ghraib and all that, somebody in the audience stood up and he said, when I saw photos, I thought these are the photos from North Carolina's prison system. I say, what? He said, yeah, I have been released after 29 years thanks to Innocent Project. And 9 years I spent because they wanted me to just admit to something small, so let me go, and I refused. So another 9 years. And I saw these things. And later on, we learned that one of the prisoners one of the warden in Abu Ghraib, Iraq, who was responsible for cruelty and what depicted, he actually used to be a warden in North Carolina prison. Connection at cruelty at home and cruelty abroad, and what Dr. King connected, struggle at home with the struggle abroad. So your struggle is mostly around the world, but I know you come back in the US and challenge the challenge the war machine and drones and manufacturing of arms, which we continue to sell to people who are, somebody had this Taliban image with the rifles and guns, and they trace each gun to one of the Western country. Did you see that image?
No, I didn't see that image, although we see
Placed
that.
each and every gun in the hands of a group of Taliban to the particular country, and that country was either in America or in Western Europe. So the whole machine of war and armament is somehow connected with selling and making more money. Of course, otherwise Taliban don't have factories of, they can make small arms here and there, but somebody is selling them arm. We were selling them arm when they were fighting Soviet Union, and I'm pretty sure Russia is selling them something, which they're fighting America with. So this war machine is connected with the armament. So what do you think? We get about 5 minutes left. I'd like to do a little bit on this. How do you see the peace movement in America? My concern is that during the Iraq war, it was pretty strong. And we'll focus on Iraq, not as much as in Afghanistan. And I feel that anti-war movement and peace movement sort of have lost its momentum. Or at this moment, it seems like President Trump is the major peace movement leader here. What is going on?
Oh. Well, we face some great terrors. The terror of what we're doing to our environment, the possibility of planetary collapse, is something that has to be dealt with. And I think a younger generation is very dedicated to coping with climate catastrophe. Within the United States, mass incarceration is a huge, huge issue, and particularly amongst people of color. That has to be dealt with. The idea of people at borders, as we mentioned before, being treated in inhumane ways, all of these things are terribly important. Now, I myself want to say, without any question, that until we dismantle the United States military-industrial complex, there can't be any rational discussion about dealing with any of those other problems, because the military takes the resources relentlessly, and there's nothing left. When we look at our budget, $738 billion for the military, there's just simply not the resource in terms of funds or ingenuity or problem-solving will to go into coping with these other problems. And that's not even beginning to look at the international problems. So I think the anti-war movement has been somewhat, I don't want to say sidelined, but not regarded as so important within the continuum of other issues that are certainly taking people's attention. That's why I suppose I find Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King so very, very important, because at a time when it was not popular for him to also bring into his preaching word about the war in Vietnam, his own colleagues were saying, look, Martin, you've got to leave that war talk out of things. We're going to lose funding. People don't want to see the civil rights movement taking on the war movement. He said in conscience, I can do no other. And so I think we conscientiously have to keep trying to make the connections and do it respectfully, but also be very, very rational. We do face great, great terrors, but the idea of the war on terror somehow meeting our needs, I think it's a smokescreen. I think it's a fake. I think that it's been designed to sell weaponry and keep weapon makers in the flush with loads and loads of cash. I also think that as religious leaders, people need to recognize that in some ways the major religion in this country right now is militarism. That's what people think will save them. And so we have to dismantle that.
Survey after survey, military is one of the institutions of America which comes at the highest level of respect in our country. I mean, the Congress and the presidency and the politician being at the bottom of the list. But number one comes military in terms of respect. And that is probably because of the discipline, because of so many people historically have been connected, and maybe because of the good image building. So we have 1 minute left. Give me all the wisdom you have in 1 minute.
Well, living simply, sharing resources radically, preferring service to dominance. These are the ways that we can gather together and persist. And whether or not we experience traditionally evaluated success maybe isn't the most important question. I think the most important question is how can we learn to live together without killing one another?
Thank you so much, Kathy Kelly. Sharing more and consuming less and radically consuming less is your message. And peace movement is something which is needed for this world. Whether it's Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or Jesus and Moses and David, all these leaders led humanity for peace, justice, fairness, and equity. And that has to become a mission for us individually and collectively. And when I see my mentor, Kathy Kelly, I see she is way ahead of me. I pray, but I'm afraid of following her step because it's sometimes not easy. You're watching Imam Malik Mujahid at Mujahid Talks at Muslim Network TV. We're always there on Galaxy 19 satellite, as well as Amazon Fire TV, as well as Muslim Network.tv. Thank you so much. Be healthy, be productive, and stand for peace and justice. Salam.
Salam.